Whether we consider a one celled amoeba, a giant sequoia tree, or a lumbering elephant, cells are all microscopic in size. Now, why is it that cells are so small? Wouldn't it make more sense for cells to grow to a much larger size? That way, the human body, for instance, could be made up of a few hundred large cells instead of trillions of really tiny ones. And yet, the cell is considered to be an efficient system. Is there an explanation for the small size of cells? Let's take a look at that. As an efficient open system, the cell has to be able to carry out all of the life processes. The transport of materials into and out of the cell is absolutely critical because these materials will determine how the other processes function. The cell membrane is the barrier to free exchange between the outside environment and the cytoplasm. Whatever changes happen to the cell, the ability to transport materials has to be kept at a maximum. If a cell becomes larger and its volume increases, more molecules will be needed to be transported across the cell surface in order to take part in the cell's functions. Also, the distance any molecule has to travel from the cell surface will increase. So, if the cell is to maintain its ability to transport substances, there has to be a greater surface area to match the increased need for molecule transport. One way to see how the surface area changes in relation to volume as the cell changes in size is to calculate the surface area to volume ratio for different cell sizes. So let's take a look at that.
This is a tutorial on surface area to volume ratio. When considering surface area to volume ratio for cells, I'm going to use a model in which we use a square cell, uh, um, a cube, as opposed to a circle. It just makes our calculations a little easier, and the math a little easier. But using that as a model will still work for any shape that you care to use. So let's take our cell here and calculate its volume. I'm going to say that this particular length is 1 centimeter, and this is 1 centimeter, and that is 1 centimeter. So it's a perfect cube, 1 centimeter by 1 centimeter by 1 centimeter. The volume of a cube is, of course, given by its length times width times height, but since this is a perfect cube, we can just say that the length cubed is the volume, which is 1 centimeter cubed, which equals 1 centimeter cubed. So we have a volume of 1. Our surface area, the surface area of one of these squares is length times width. So we have it 1 by 1. So length times width. And then we have 1, 2, 3, and in the back 4, 5 on this side, and then 6 counting the bottom. So we have our length times width times 6 to give this total surface area for the cube. So now 1 centimeter times 1 centimeter times 6. 1 times 1 is 1. Times 6, we have 6 centimeters squared. The surface area to volume ratio is then 6 to 1. So for a 1 by 1 by 1 cube, we have a surface area to volume ratio of 6 to 1. Let's get rid of all these calculations. We can keep all of that. And so that's just this little cell here. Now the surface area to volume ratio then gets interesting when you get bigger. What happens when you get bigger? So that's our 1 by 1 cube. Now let's pull out another cube. So I'm going to consider something that's twice this size. So I'm going to take one of these. I'm going to just increase it in size until I have a 2 by 2 cube. So that looks roughly good. So we're going to say this is 2 by 2 by 2. So 2 centimeters by 2 centimeters by 2 centimeters. And get rid of our other ones. To calculate a surface area and volume again, to get our ratio, our surface area is, again, length times width times 6, which is 2 times 2 times 6. 2 times 2 is 4. 4 times 6 is 24. So we have 24 centimeters squared. So our surface area is equal to 24. And our volume is 2 times 2 times 2, or 2 cubed. 2 times 2 is 4. 2 fours are 8. So we have 8 centimeters cubed. So we have a new ratio of 24 over 8. Now 8 goes into 24. Oh, lost my pen here. 3 times into itself once. So for a 1 by 1 by 1 cube, we had a ratio of 6 to 1. Now we have a ratio of 3 to 1. Our surface area to volume ratio has gotten smaller. So let's consider these particular cubes. Put this one over here, and let's put that ratio within it to remind us that it's 3 to 1. Take one of these smaller ones, put it here, and I don't want to lose it in behind it, so we'll just put it in front of it. Put it there. And let's consider an even bigger one. We've gone from 6 to 1 to 3 to 1, but let's now try something that's really quite tall. A 3 by 3 by 3. So there roughly is our 3 by 3 by 3 cell. It has now, in all of these, notice the surface area has gotten larger. It went from 6 to 24, even though our ratio is getting smaller. We're going to see the same thing happen again. For our surface area, that's length times width times 6. So it's 3 times 3 times 6. 3 times 3 is 9. And 9 times 6 is, oh, lost my pen, 54. Our volume is, again, 3 times 3 times 3, so it's 3 cubed, length times width times height. 3 times 3 is 9. And 9 times 3 is 27. So now we have our new ratio of surface area over volume is equal to 54 over 27. Or to reduce, 54 divided by 9 is 6, and 27 minus 3, take it down again, 2, we have a 2 to 1 ratio. So once again, our surface area to volume ratio has decreased. Now in every case, the actual numbers have increased. We used to have a surface area of 6, now we had a surface area of 24, and now we had a surface area of 54. But the volume went from 1 to 8. So while 6 jumped up to 24, that's only an increase of 4 times. From 1 to 8 was an increase of 8 times. The volume is increasing far faster than the surface area. And when we jumped again, 24 to 54, that's just a little over have doubled. But look, we had trebled, more than trebled, from 8 to 27. And so our volume will always increase faster than our surface area will increase. Another way to visually show this, and let me just clean this up for a second. There, we can keep all of these blocks as representatives of our different surface area to volume ratios. And we can see that ratio is going down. Well, what does that mean? Well, what is it that a cell does with its surface area? It needs to bring oxygen in. And so oxygen has to move into the cell. And it has to take wastes like CO2. and CO2 has to come out of the cell. And of course, CO2 and oxygen are continuously generated. And so when it's going to go in, it's going to get used up and get discarded, and then more oxygen is going to have to go in, and it's going to continuously need to bring oxygen into the cell. Similarly, I could show with the CO2, it's going to continuously have to take CO2 out of the cell because it's going to constantly generate this by the process of metabolism. And so it always has to be moving things through its cell membrane. And a basic one is a nutrient like oxygen and a waste product like CO2. If you have a large surface area, then you can easily get, you have 6 units of surface area to feed but 1 unit of volume. And this small little cell, that seems fairly reasonable. Go to this larger cell, and it has 3 units of surface area for that same per 1 unit of volume. And so there's not as much that can move through. It's restricted how much can come through to feed that one area of volume. And eventually, over here in our larger cell, we have it down to a 2-to-1 ratio. So where we used to have 6 pieces of surface area allowing oxygen in and out, over here we now have, or oxygen in and CO2 out. Over here we now have oxygen moving in, CO2 moving out, but now they're restricted to a 2-to-1 ratio. Now, to visually show this, to show how much surface area you lose, it might be useful to build a cell and build this sort of big block here. So here's our standard block. I'm going to get rid of those two. And let's build this one. So, but we'll build it from the single units. So first we have to lay our base because it's a 3 by 3 by 3. Now notice, every time one of these cells are touching here, we've lost that particular surface area in this because we only have the outside surface area. And so all these areas that are touching are in the larger cells being represented as an area that we've lost. And so with only the external surface area, you can see that we have lost quite a bit of surface area. It's all being covered up. Now this is why, of course, you're made up of millions and billions and of cells rather than one giant cell. Because by doing this, if we make ourselves out of many cells, so then we can throw in blood vessels in between here. We can use the surface area of each individual cell and diffuse oxygen in and CO2 out. And so this structure that I've just made is actually far more efficient. It's got a huge number of cells that we can actually use. Now, if you translate this into a single cell, we've lost all that internal surface area and we're left with just the outside. And so its surface area to volume ratio is 2-to-1. Whereas this is made up of many individual cells that can cooperate, and we can put blood vessels in between, and we can use the surface area of each individual cell. Now that I pull it out, we've got the whole 6 sides to work with. I can, we can put fluid in between and get the oxygen to where we go. So our bodies have been built to use small cells because they have a better surface area to volume ratio. And we have all our organs designed to get nutrients to these small cells. And we have to deal with this in all sorts of ways. Our lungs are highly wrinkled and very, very have lots of folding in order to try and increase the surface area they can diffuse in. Our brains have folds and ridges in them to increase the surface area within a small amount of space. If you look at large cells, a nice small cell might look, it's going to be a little dot or a little a shape that can diffuse, and if it's small, that's all it needs. But a larger cell, say a protozoa, a large protozoa, might do something a little bit more grand to get that surface area. It might put out little tendrils, and those tendrils increase the surface area so that it can be larger than these smaller cells. And that way, diffusion can occur. We can get oxygen coming in, and we can get CO2 coming out because we've increased the surface area by folding. So when cells get too large, they have to start to fold in some way to manage to get all the oxygen in and the CO2 out, and as well as all the other nutrients. where small cells can just stay small. Now, there's a limit to how much folding you can do and still be a small cell. So eventually, we get cooperation between cells, and eventually you get superorganisms in which they are cooperating so well that they are fully functioning organisms such as us. Um, some species will have colonies of individuals that will come together to do this, but that's a bit of a topic for another day. I hope that explains some of surface area to volume ratio, and that was useful.
For the survival of each cell, whether as a single celled organism or as one cell in a mass of cells, the amount of surface exposed to the environment is absolutely crucial. The surface area determines the opportunities for transport of materials. If very little surface is available, the opportunities for intake of needed materials and expulsion of wastes are severely limited. What happens to the cell if it's unable to take in enough nutrients or is unable to remove poisons quickly? Passive transport is one of the ways in which water, gases, and some dissolved nutrients are able to pass into and out of the cell. These materials must get quickly to all parts of the cell. In the case of cells, bigger does not necessarily mean better. However, cells in multicellular organisms perform specialized functions, and their shape and size are determined by these functions. To maximize efficiency and promote survival, each individual cell needs to have the greatest possible surface area in relation to volume. In this way, there are lots of opportunities for transport of substances to occur, and the distance any molecule has to travel within the cell is not too great. Multicellular organisms have been able to adapt to balance the increased size of the organism against the need for an appropriate surface area to volume ratio. If you were to compare a large plant and a small one, you would notice that the large plant has more mass and volume. It is a challenge to maintain an optimum surface area to volume ratio in order to meet all the needs of the cells. The plant may have large, flat leaves to create as much surface area as possible for exchange and transport of materials. The smaller plant has less mass and volume. It has less problem to transport materials quickly to all the cells. Multicellular organisms have developed other types of internal transport systems to reduce dependence on diffusion and to help in the transport of materials. So, for example, the circulatory, digestive, and respiratory systems of animals are all involved in the transport of essential materials to all the cells of the body. Transport is not confined only to the surface of the skin. In humans, no cell is more than 0.1 millimeters away from a capillary that transport blood to bring nutrients and remove wastes. Plants also have transport systems for essential materials. These are different from the systems in animals. The xylem is concerned with the delivery of water from the roots to all parts of the plant, while the phloem distributes sugars throughout the plant according to conditions operating at any particular time. The transport system may carry substances long distance, even up to 100 meters in very large trees. Some organisms or specialized structures have features that help to increase the overall surface area to volume ratio. The alveoli in your lungs are these small sacs that increase the total surface area for transport of oxygen and carbon dioxide. Tiny finger-like projections called villi or microvilli extend from the lining of your small intestine and that helps to provide more surface for the absorption of nutrients. The roots of plants have tiny, thin extensions called root hairs that increase the surface area of the cell available for the uptake of water.